All right, let's dive into something truly epic today.
Epic is right. We're talking empires, battles,
And a mysterious darkness that stopped a war in its tracks. Sounds like a Hollywood blockbuster, right?
more like ancient history, but just as dramatic, I promise.
I'm all ears. Today we're tackling the Battle of the Eclipse, a clash between the Lydians and the Medes.
Two powerhouses of the ancient Near East, and their story is anything but simple.
Especially since our main source, Herodotus, was writing over a century later. Talk about a game of historical telephone.
Exactly, and there are so many questions. Did an eclipse really happen, or was it something else entirely? And could someone have actually predicted it?
Okay, before we get to the eclipse itself,
Uh,
let's set the stage. Who were these Lydians and Medes?
While the Lydians were based in what's now Western Turkey, they were known for their wealth, powerful military, and controlled some key trade routes.
Think King Croesus, the guy with the Midas touch.
That's the one. As for the Medes, they were a force to be reckoned with in northwestern Iran. Imagine them thundering across the battlefield on horseback, raining arrows down on their enemies.
Okay, so we've got these two powerful empires clashing for 6 years. That's longer than some Hollywood marriages.
Now you got it. And remember, this was a time of constant expansion, competition for resources, and vying for dominance. These empires saw each other as obstacles.
So tensions were high, the stakes were enormous, and then boom, this darkness descends right in the middle of a battle. Talk about a plot twist.
It's a pivotal moment, but was it really an eclipse? Herodotus was writing well after the fact, so we have to consider other possibilities too.
Like what? What else could have caused this sudden darkness?
It could have been a thick cloud cover, a massive dust storm, even smoke from a huge fire. We just don't know for sure.
But even if it wasn't an eclipse, the battle ended right after this darkness. It's almost as if both sides took it as a sign to stop fighting.
Right, and that's where the story takes an even more fascinating turn. Enter Thales of Miletus, a philosopher who supposedly predicted this whole thing.
Thales of Miletus, that name rings a bell. Wasn't he considered one of the wisest men of ancient Greece?
Absolutely. He was a true pioneer, fascinated by astronomy, cosmology, trying to explain the world through observation and logic, not just myths and superstition. He's even credited with being the first to explain natural phenomena through scientific reasoning.
Wow, way ahead of his time. So this is a guy who was thinking outside the box centuries ago. But did he actually predict this eclipse?
That's the million-dollar question. We have to remember there are no surviving writings from Thales himself. Everything we know comes from accounts written centuries later.
So it's like a historical puzzle with missing pieces. How do we even begin to figure out if he actually predicted this eclipse?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting. To understand how Thales might have known, we have to look to the Babylonians and their incredible astronomical knowledge.
Oh, this is getting good. I'm ready for another layer of this historical mystery.
They had discovered something called the Saros cycle, a repeating pattern of eclipses that occurs roughly every 18 years.
Wait, hold on. A repeating pattern of eclipses. I need you to explain that to me like I'm 5.
Okay, imagine you have a special clock that chimes only when an eclipse is about to happen. This clock, or cycle, chimes about every 18 years. The Babylonians figured out this clock so they could roughly predict when an eclipse might occur.
Okay, that makes sense. So is the theory that Thales somehow learned about this Saros cycle from the Babylonians?
It's certainly a possibility, but even if he knew about the cycle, that doesn't mean he could pinpoint the exact date and location. That would require a much deeper understanding of astronomy.
So predicting an eclipse back then was a bit of a gamble, even with this Saros cycle. You might get the general time frame, but the specifics are still a mystery.
Exactly. And remember, we haven't even touched on the juicy part yet. Herodotus throws in a truly wild backstory to this war involving the Scythians, nomadic warriors known for their horsemanship.
Oh, this is about to get good. Lay it on me. What's the story with the Scythians?
Well, buckle up, because this is where the tale takes a dark turn. It's a story of betrayal, revenge,
Hey,
and
don't leave me hanging.
cannibalism. We'll get into the gruesome details after the break. All right, before the break, we left off with a cliffhanger. The Scythians, nomadic warriors, and their rather unsavory role in this whole saga.
Yeah, you mentioned cannibalism. I'm morbidly curious. What's the story here?
Well, according to Herodotus, a group of Scythians were seeking refuge with the Median king. We don't know exactly why they needed refuge, but things went south pretty quickly. They ended up killing one of the king's sons.
Oh, wow, that's a bold move. What happened next?
They cooked him and served him to the king as a meal.
Hold on. That's a seriously messed up dinner party.
You can say that again. Needless to say, the king was not happy.
I can imagine. So what did he do?
He demanded that the Lydian king who was harboring these Scythians hand them over, but the Lydian king refused. And that, my friend, is how this whole 6-year war kicked off.
Wow, talk about a chain reaction. A gruesome act of betrayal sparking a war between empires. That's some serious historical drama.
It really is. But let's get back to the eclipse, or the supposed eclipse, that brought the war to a halt. Can we actually pinpoint the date of this event?
Yeah, that's what I'm really curious about. How do you even begin to figure out the date of an eclipse that happened over 2,500 years ago?
Well, it's a bit like detective work, using astronomy and historical records as our clues. Astronomers have been trying to match Herodotus's description with a real astronomical event for centuries.
I bet there have been a lot of theories over the years.
You're absolutely right. One prominent astronomer in the 1600s, Cetus Calvisius, thought it happened in 607 BCE. Then Isaac Newton himself favored 585 BCE. And just to add to the mix, another scholar, Henry Usher, put his money on 601 BCE.
So a lot of disagreement. How do they even begin to narrow it down?
A big breakthrough came in the 19th century when astronomer Francis Baily meticulously calculated the paths of all possible eclipses and compared them to the battle's location. He landed on September 30th, 610 BCE as the most likely date.
So, mystery solved.
Not so fast. Remember that Saros cycle we talked about earlier? Well, it turns out it's not perfectly precise. The moon's movements have tiny shifts over time that can affect eclipse timing, even centuries later.
Oh, so even the most meticulous calculations can be thrown off by a wobble in the moon. So 610 BCE was out.
Pretty much. As scientists learned more about the moon's motion, they started questioning Baily's conclusions. New dates were proposed, including May 18th, 603 BCE, and the current frontrunner, May 28th, 585 BCE.
So 585 BCE is the most likely culprit. But I'm sensing a but coming.
You know me too well. Even this day has its skeptics. Some astronomers point out that on this date, the eclipse would have started just a couple of hours before sunset. They argue it wouldn't have been dark enough for the dramatic effect Herodotus describes.
A sunset eclipse. Wouldn't it still have been noticeable, though? I mean, even a partial eclipse is pretty dramatic.
Oh, absolutely. The sky would have darkened significantly and the temperature would have dropped. But it's a valid point to consider. The darkness wouldn't have been as complete as a midday eclipse.
And we have to remember, our perception of time is different. What might feel like gradual twilight to us could have felt like a sudden darkness to them.
Exactly. And then there are those who believe the whole eclipse story is a myth, a literary device used by Herodotus to heighten the drama.
So, was it a real eclipse or just a good story? What do you think?
That's the million-dollar question, and honestly, I don't think there's a simple answer. We have to weigh the evidence and consider different interpretations, but that's what makes history so intriguing, right?
Absolutely. It's like we're detectives trying to solve a cold case with clues scattered across millennia.
Exactly. Let's look at the arguments for and against the eclipse theory. What makes the eclipse a plausible explanation?
Well, we have Herodotus' account. He was a respected historian, even if he wasn't always 100% accurate.
Right, he wasn't known for making things up out of thin air. And the fact that he mentions Thales predicting it adds another layer of intrigue.
Yeah, it's like, why include that detail unless it was a widely believed story?
Yeah.
And the fact that this story has been repeated and debated for centuries shows its power. It really captures the imagination.
It really does. The idea that human conflicts could be influenced by celestial events, it's a theme that resonates across cultures and time periods. Now, what about the arguments against the eclipse?
Well, as you said, the timing is a big one. The 585 BCE eclipse would have been close to sunset, maybe not as dramatic as a midday eclipse.
Right, and our modern understanding of time is different. Back then, people might have perceived time differently, so a few minutes of twilight could have felt much longer, more significant.
It's all about perspective. What seems minor to us could have been a life-altering experience for them. So we have compelling arguments on both sides. Where does that leave us?
I think the key takeaway is that history is rarely black and white. There are always multiple perspectives, conflicting accounts, and gaps in our knowledge. The Battle of the Eclipse perfectly embodies this.
So instead of searching for a definitive answer, maybe we should embrace the mystery. It's the unknowns that keep us digging deeper, right?
Exactly. But let's not forget, the impact of this battle and the supposed eclipse went far beyond that one battlefield. It had lasting consequences for the entire region.
Oh, right. We haven't even talked about the aftermath. What happened after the fighting stopped?
Well, that's a story for the final part of our deep dive. We'll explore the peace treaty that followed, the the ripple effects across the ancient Near East, and what this whole saga tells us about the power of storytelling and the human search for meaning in a sometimes chaotic universe. So we've spent a lot of time dissecting this battle, the eclipse, and the mystery surrounding Thales' prediction. But now, let's explore the ripple effects, the consequences that went far beyond that battlefield.
Because this wasn't just some random skirmish, right? We're talking about empires, a possible celestial intervention, and a peace treaty that reshaped the ancient Near East.
Exactly. Think about it. This event, whether it was a predicted eclipse or just a perfectly timed coincidence, had a profound psychological impact on the people who lived through it.
It makes you wonder how they interpreted it. I mean,
Huh.
we're talking about a world without electricity, without our scientific explanations for eclipses.
It would have been terrifying, awe-inspiring, and maybe even a little bit divine all at the same time.
You're right. They didn't have our modern understanding of the universe. An eclipse, especially during a battle, would have felt like a sign from the gods.
And that's where the story of Thales becomes even more powerful. Imagine if he really did predict this. He would have been seen as a prophet, a man who could read the heavens.
Talk about street cred. He would have been the ultimate influencer of his time. But even if he didn't predict it, the fact that this eclipse, or whatever it was, happened at such a crucial moment, it makes you think about fate, destiny, the role of the universe in shaping human events.
Absolutely. What if the eclipse hadn't happened? Would the battle have continued? Would the war have dragged on even longer? We can't know for sure, but it makes you think about the butterfly effect, how seemingly small events can have enormous consequences.
Mind-blowing. It makes you realize that history isn't just a straight line. It's full of twists and turns, unexpected detours, and sometimes it's the things we can't explain that change the course of everything.
And that's why this story has captivated people for centuries. It speaks to our fascination with the interplay between human actions and the forces of the universe, the things we can control and the things we can't. The eclipse, real or embellished by Herodotus, became a symbol of that tension.
And it also makes you think about the power of storytelling in shaping our understanding of the past. We have Herodotus' account, written over a century after the event. Then we have later historians adding their own interpretations, their own biases, maybe even a few embellishments along the way. It's like a game of historical telephone.
It really is. And that's both the challenge and the beauty of studying history. We have to sift through the layers, try to separate fact from fiction, and piece together a narrative from incomplete and sometimes contradictory information.
Like detectives, but our clues are scattered across millennia.
Exactly. And sometimes the most compelling mysteries are the ones we can never fully solve. The Battle of the Eclipse might be one of those mysteries.
So what's the big takeaway from all of this? What have we learned from our deep dive into this ancient clash of empires and the mysterious darkness that brought it to an end?
I think it's this. History is more than just a list of names, dates, and battles. It's a complex tapestry woven from human memory, interpretation, and storytelling.
The Battle of the Eclipse reminds us to be curious but also critical, to question the stories we're told, and to embrace the mystery and wonder that lie at the heart of human history.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, there you have it, folks. Another deep dive into the fascinating world of history. We've explored the battle, the eclipse, the philosopher who may or may not have seen it coming, and the enduring legacy of this event. But as always, we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on the Battle of the Eclipse? Do you think Thales really predicted it? Head over to our website and share your theories. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those brain cells firing.